you're in Singapore. You were ordered into lockdown. Tell us what that's like in Singapore.
Well, you take it pretty seriously, and the government here doesn't mess about when people aren't really compliant. And most people in Singapore, culturally, it is a very compliant culture here. So, yes, before we even knew that my husband had tested positive, we had a call from the Ministry of Health saying, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm home." And they said, "Do not leave. No one is to leave your apartment." And we were not allowed to step foot outside of our apartment for 14 days.
That's incredible. They didn't test you or your son, but health officials continued, as you pointed out, to monitor you on a daily basis. How does it work where you are, the government really is keeping an eye on you, tick-tock 24/7?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So once we were issued with this quarantine order, the next morning, a couple of people turned up in all of their hazardous gear, treating us as though we were potentially infected with COVID-19. We had to fill in a lot of forms, and they let us know that they were taking it pretty seriously. And then 3 times a day for the next 14 days, they would call us using WhatsApp and the video function, and they could see us, but we couldn't see them, and just to check that we were in fact in our apartment. And a few times they said, "I want you to show your camera around so we can see where you are." They took it pretty seriously. And if any point in time our temperature had got over 99.5, we were to call a number, and they would send an ambulance and people in their hazardous protective gear, and we would be taken to the hospital.
It's already terrifying believing you might have contracted it. Now you have this situation where people could storm in, as you pointed out, in their protective gear, which I can't, my heart races as I'm even hearing these details from you. So when your husband, Andrew, tested positive, you also say that the contact tracing was hardcore. In what way?
Immediately, we were contacted, obviously, because we'd been in direct contact with my husband. And they grilled him repeatedly about where he had been. He had actually flown in from New York 2 days earlier. I have 2 kids living in New York at college there. And so he hadn't been in the country very long. But they went over and over and over with him as though it felt like I felt like I was a criminal. He's like, "I really haven't been anywhere." But they absolutely want to make sure they know anyone that you have been in touch with. And they have, obviously tens of thousands of people who work in contact tracing here in Singapore, and it's a very small population, really.
So when you and your son were in lockdown in your home in Singapore, Andrew, your husband, was in the hospital, were you able to communicate with him at all?
Yeah, look, we were. In the first few days, his throat was extremely sore and he had a cough, which is obviously one of the symptoms of COVID-19. There is obviously different people experience it very differently. And to be honest, the first few days it hurt me to hear him. His voice it just hurt me to hear him speak. So I just stuck with texting him. And he slept a lot those first few days as well. And to be honest, we had pretty fleeting. I was just kind of checking in, "How are you?" which he clearly wasn't very well.
So after 30 days, Andrew was finally allowed to come home. What was that like for you? What was that reunion like?
It was extremely emotional. You have to test negative 2 days in a row to be able to be released in Singapore. So unlike in the US, where frankly you aren't even kept in hospital unless you need medical care, here in Singapore they don't let anybody in the community, even home, to self-isolate. And so it had been a really, really long wait. It felt like a long time for him to actually get the negative testing. And I broke down in tears. I was very teary. And then I came straight home, and actually they released him extremely quickly. And he was in a cab and walking in the door before I hardly had time to even prepare for his homecoming. And I had a cry, and my son Ben put on some music, and we just celebrated.